I would like, first of all, to explain this interest. Secondly, talk about the state of play in the Western Balkans. That's my focus. Then come on to the issue of domestic observers. That's what the seminar today is about. And finally, touch on a little bit the support that we give to elections. So why do we care about democracy? Why do we care about elections? It comes back to the treaty, of course. So the EU is founded on the values of freedom, democracy, the rule of law, respect for human rights. And we project these values beyond the EU borders. We have a clear commitment to supporting democracy and promoting respect for human rights and the role of the civil society throughout the world. And we make this visible through financial assistance and through the role of election monitoring that David has mentioned. And this is also the case for our closest neighbours, so the neighbourhood and the Western Balkans. And this is, I'm so at the moment the acting director for the Western Balkans, so this is where I have my expertise. The accession process, we have three sets of criteria for joining countries that want to join. We have the political criteria, we have the economic criteria, and we have the so-called acquis, so whether the countries can take on the obligations of membership. And so what's the link to elections? Well, of course, the link to elections is on the political criteria, where we talk about the stability of the institutions, which can guarantee democracy, the rule of law, human rights, and respect for and protection of minorities. Elections are the conduct of elections is the cornerstone of the stability and effective functioning of democratic institutions. And I hope you've all seen it, we issued a strategy, the Commission issued a strategy in the beginning of February on the Western Balkans, which for us was really a key moment in taking forward our policy on the region. And we tried to put back in focus the importance of reforms in the rule of law and to underline really what we expect to see in the countries of the region as they move forward towards the European Union. And in particular on elections, we underlined that elections should be free and fair, and the recommendations of election observation missions should be properly implemented. And we're following very closely, of course, how this is going in the region. Our next rendezvous on this will be our annual reports, this time an 18-month annuality, but we come with our reports on the 17th of April, and we will assess the situation in all of the countries of the Western Balkans in terms of their preparedness in these issues. Without giving away what we're going to be saying in detail on all of the countries, we do see that there has been progress, of course, over the years, and luckily so, in establishing democratic norms and institutions, but there have been issues of concern in recent elections. And the shortcomings that we've seen, both identified with international observers and domestic observers, have been relating to the lack of confidence in the impartiality and independence of election management bodies, the abuse of state resources and pressure on voters, the lack of impartial access to media, as well as insufficient legal safeguards for the freedom of expression. It's important, I think, to be clear that cases of intimidation and vote buying are not a special category of problems, but somehow underline the weaknesses in the democratic culture in these countries and the rule of law and human rights protections. International observation in the Western Balkans and Turkey is carried out by OSCE and ODIHR, except in Kosovo, where the EU takes on this role, which is why our strategic partnership with the OSCE and the Council of Europe on electoral matters in particular is really of importance. But we do really value and rely on the role of local domestic observers groups as watchdogs on various parts of the electoral process. They provide very valuable information, in particular on the local elections that are not generally observed by the international observers. And also, as for the internationals, but the role of local observers doesn't just begin and end on election day. They are, with their presence and their knowledge, they can monitor developments throughout the electoral cycle. They also have a role to play in preventing, detecting, and following up on allegations of irregularities and fraud. I wanted to make the same point that you made, David, on the credibility of the domestic observers. It really is important that they both have and that they act and are seen to act impartially at all times. Otherwise, their credibility is undermined. And I think this is something which is extremely important for the value of their work on the ground. Otherwise, we risk that we get taken hostage, if you like, by the recommendations which they're making. If we are, as the European Union or the European Commission, seen to be partial to the observers who are themselves not seen as impartial. And the cooperation with international partners and domestic observers groups is important not just in assessing progress made by the countries, but also in providing guidance and support to them in addressing the necessary democratic reforms which they need to undertake to meet their own European integration ambitions. So in terms of our support, we, as I hope you know, support the Western Balkans across the board in their pre-accession process, including in supporting the establishment and strengthening of democratic institutions. In particular, and I mention it because it's relatively well known, the European Instrument for Democracy and Human Rights, we're supporting local CSOs in a wide range of democratic participation activities, including electoral monitoring and assistance. Let me just give you two examples of support, in really particularly on election. So last year we began an EPA-funded project of 1.6 million, which was implemented by OSCE ODIHR, which aimed at supporting beneficiaries in the Western Balkans to follow up electoral assessments and electoral observation mission recommendations. My colleagues will explain further about this project later. The second example I wanted to give is part of our engagement with civil society in the Western Balkans. We are working with the European Empowerment of Democracy, Endowment for Democracy, supporting independent and pluralistic media and civil society. And as I mentioned before, the link is important because freedom of expression and freedom of media and unbiased media coverage is essential in the conduct of free and fair elections. So just to conclude, thank you for inviting me here today, and we're very happy that the European Commission is part of this, and my colleagues will be part of the sessions later. Really, the issues that you're discussing are essential for the development of democracy in the Western Balkans, which I'm particularly responsible for, but also for the neighbourhood region more generally. So really, good luck, enjoy the discussions, and I'm looking forward to hearing the recommendations that you'll come with.